My whole class was thrown forward in time, to the year 3035. Humans, once the rulers of the food chain, had become one of the rarest species alive. Leo, our class clown, was having the time of his life. Bro, this place rocks. They feed us, give us beds, even bathe us. Steak, lobster, dessert, what's not to like? Mark, the class president, was just as thrilled. Central air, heated floors, and waterbeds? This is luxury. And Ariana, the self-proclaimed goddess of our grade, flipped her hair. Why do they keep staring at me? Guess they just can't resist perfection. Meanwhile, my gut was screaming that something was terribly wrong. My mouth felt dry, my skin prickled. Oh, my sweet, clueless classmates. You forgot one crucial detail. Endangered species aren't only protected, they're bred. Over and over again. I was the last one they found. It had all started on a school trip. Our animal science class went to a nature preserve to observe a wild panda, but our transport overturned on the way back. When I came to, the world had changed. We were no longer in our time. My leg was injured, and while scavenging for food, I got separated from the others. After a sleepless night, I limped eastward up a mountain until I saw him again, the towering insectoid who had been tailing me in silence. He wore spotless gloves, his body exoskeletal, yet strangely graceful. I tried to flee, dragging my leg, clawing at the dirt for a rock to defend myself. But he didn't move to attack. Instead, he stood there, watching me with those enormous, shimmering eyes made up of countless facets. A low, steady hum rose from his throat, soft, almost comforting. Maybe he didn't mean harm. Blood seeped from my wound, weakening me further. The insectoid gave another quiet chirp, beckoning me. Then he set something down, a piece of fruit. I hesitated, starving and cautious. My eyes flicked to the fruit, and in that moment, pain lanced through my ankle. Something sharp had pierced my skin. A slender, needle-like stinger injected a cold, numbing substance that crawled through my veins like frost. Darkness swallowed me. When I awoke, I was inside a massive, alien structure that pulsed with a faint metallic glow. 2 insectoid guards escorted me past shimmering, mercury-like towers. Holographic symbols floated in the air, shifting and flickering too quickly for me to read. Through transparent corridors, I caught glimpses of other humans. They crouched in corners, trembling, their faces strange and unfamiliar. Skin blotched, eyes uneven, hair sparse. They all bore the same haunting signs of captivity. As soon as I was released from my containment pod, a tremor of excitement rippled through the facility. Every insectoid turned toward me. Their clicking intensified, echoing like 1,000 whispers. They swarmed closer, lenses glinting as they stared. One, larger than the rest, clearly their leader, extended a spindly, jointed arm toward me. I couldn't move, the sedative still locking my muscles in place. Its hand brushed against my hair. A chorus of soft clicks followed, almost like laughter. The creature's pupils dilated. If it were human, I'd have called that expression pure joy. They adored us. They loved our smooth skin, our softness, the fragile beauty of what we once were. They took me to a private chamber that looked disturbingly like a medical lab. An insectoid medic examined my injured leg. Their treatment was nothing like human medicine. It was clinical, efficient, and cruel. The dead flesh was sliced away, without anesthetic. No bandages, no painkillers, just the expectation that I would survive. When the paralysis wore off, agony crashed over me so sharply that I almost blacked out. A caretaker appeared, holding a bowl of milk. It was still warm, with a wild, musky scent. I gagged, but forced myself to drink every drop. The caretaker seemed satisfied. It studied me with those alien eyes, and when it thought no one was watching, its gloved hand brushed the top of my head in a gesture that might have been affection. I wanted to recoil, but I stayed perfectly still. Compliance was my only shield. If I wanted to survive, I had to eat what they offered and watch everything carefully. My obedience paid off. Days later, after finishing another bland meal, my caretaker lifted me with surprising gentleness. A scan of its iris activated a light rail corridor, and we glided through a hallway that shimmered with an eerie, white glow. The doors at the end opened with a hiss. Inside was a strange, almost nostalgic scene: human furniture, chairs, tables, and benches arranged like relics in a museum, every piece looking centuries old yet perfectly preserved. And deeper within the room, I saw them. Rows of translucent pods, each filled with a glowing fluid, and inside, motionless bodies. The nearest pod held a familiar face. Leo the class clown. A jolt of panic tore through me. An insectoid doctor noticed and chittered a command. My caretaker lowered me to the floor. I hobbled forward, pressing my hand to the glass, scanning the faces inside each pod. Then one of them stirred. Ariana. I reached out to tap the surface, but before I could, a mechanical arm shot out and projected glowing text into the air. Data I couldn't understand. Ariana, I whispered, my throat raw. My caretaker made a sharp, joyful sound. The first word I had spoken since my capture had clearly delighted it. It clicked rapidly to the doctor, and seconds later, the pods began to open. Ariana emerged first, followed by the others, blinking and disoriented. Tears welled in my eyes, a painful surge of relief. But when they saw me, my classmates simply laughed, as if we had woken from a bad dream. They had been taken 2 weeks before me. They already knew the truth. This was Earth, but not the Earth we'd left behind. It had been conquered long ago by an alien race, known as the insectoids. Humanity had been reduced to a few hundred survivors, officially categorized as a protected species. We were their new obsession, their pets, their prized collectibles. Fewer than 100 humans remained, cared for with the same dedication once reserved for endangered animals. Leo grinned when he saw my disbelief. Think about how people used to treat pandas. That's us now. Claire, our class genius, tried to reassure me. Don't be afraid, Barb. They won't hurt us. We're safe here. We were so worried when you disappeared. They spoke with an ease that unsettled me. In their time here, they'd learned to read bits of the insectoids' writing and behavior. Their intelligence had earned them special attention, which only fed their sense of privilege. They lived in comfort and mistook captivity for care. Claire smiled faintly. According to what they've shown us, there are probably fewer humans alive now than pandas used to be. We made a bet. Leo says 3,000, Mark says 1,000, Ariana thinks 800. What's your guess? I couldn't answer. Through the observation window behind us, I saw my insectoid caretaker again, silently cleaning equipment. Its many eyes glimmered faintly as it glanced at me. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw emotion there, worry, maybe even pity. Was it afraid for us, its fragile specimens? The irony burned. Humans, who had once dominated the Earth for millions of years, who had exterminated 85% of wild mammals and devoured half the planet's vegetation, were now the ones on display, preserved like artifacts. A thought struck me. Endangered species. My mind flashed back to the malformed humans I'd seen in the other chambers. Their uneven eyes, their patchy hair. I remembered reading about an Australian family whose generations of inbreeding had led to terrible deformities, mutations, blindness, speech loss. What if the others in this facility weren't different species at all, but us? A chill settled in my bones. Beside me, my classmates were still chatting cheerfully. Leo laughed. Man, this is paradise. No work, no stress. They bathe us, feed us steak and desserts. What's not to love? Yeah, Mark said, stretching. The air's perfect. 78 degrees. All day, every day. Ariana giggled, running her fingers through her hair. They keep staring at me. Guess they can't help it. And once again, I was the only one who felt it, the quiet dread curling beneath the comfort. Oh, my foolish classmates. You've forgotten again. Being an endangered species isn't just about being cherished. It's about being bred. Endlessly. There were 8 of us left, everyone from the same school van, everyone I once called a friend. For boys, Mark, Leo, Jax the athlete, and Simon, the quiet one who always wore glasses. For girls, Ariana, Claire, Jenna, and me. A perfect, balanced set. Each of us wore a collar, silver for the girls, gold for the boys. The symbols etched into them looked like serial codes. Mine read 88, and the insectoids kept calling me Baba. It sounded unsettlingly like my nickname, Barb. When I finally voiced the theory that had been haunting me, Simon's reaction was immediate. His whole face turned scarlet, and he froze. Ariana scowled. What are you looking at me for? She said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. They wouldn't do that, right? Mark didn't respond at first. Probably not, he muttered after a pause. At least not yet. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. We have to find a way out. But there was no out. Cameras covered every angle of the room. Their unblinking compound eyes were always on us, analyzing every breath, every twitch. Even Leo went pale. "Oh man," he whispered, half joking, half serious. "I'm still a virgin." Jenna, my roommate, was trembling. "Barb, what do we do?" I remembered what I'd learned. Insectoid eyes were made of thousands of lenses, each capturing a fragment of motion. To them, every second stretched into an eternity. They saw everything. The moment Jenna's tears fell, her caretaker stirred. "Stop crying," I hissed. "Smile. Right now." She blinked, confused.
"What?"
"Why?" "They don't understand our language, but they read expressions. If you cry, they'll think we're hurting you. Remember how people separate fighting lab rats? It's the same instinct." Her trembling lips pulled into a crooked, painful grin. Then I saw it. The hallway outside was packed. Dozens of insectoids had gathered, watching us in silence. From my brief time outside, I had learned something important about them. Status was shown by the necklaces they wore. Ordinary workers had wooden or stone beads. Professionals like medics or engineers wore crystals. But the leaders wore gold, metal forged from fragments of meteoric debris. And the larger the beads, the higher the rank. At the front of the crowd stood one with a thick golden chain. Its antennae swayed, graceful yet deliberate. Antennae were everything to them, organs for smell, sound, taste. They pulsed softly now, angled toward us. That's when I noticed it. Ariana had doused herself in perfume. Her hair was perfect, glossy, styled. She caught me staring and shrugged.
"What?"
"A girl should look her best. That was my last bottle anyway." That single drop was enough. The insectoid leader extended a claw, pointing straight at her. A caretaker entered, lifted Ariana carefully into its arms, and carried her away. The leader's antennae flicked once, as if satisfied, before its gaze turned back to the rest of us. "Are they picking people?" Simon whispered. "Are they going to pair us up?" The air turned brittle. Mark's jaw tightened. Jax's fists curled.
Even Leo stopped joking.
Simon's face was still flushed, his voice breaking when he spoke. Jax tried to sound brave. "Doesn't matter who they pick. We're not doing anything." Simon nodded quickly.
"Yeah,
"Me neither." But after Ariana was taken, no one else was chosen. The hours passed in heavy, unbearable silence. My classmates began to look to me for answers. I'd been the only one who'd survived outside, so they assumed I understood this world. But the truth was I didn't. Out there, I hadn't seen a single other human. The old cities were ruins, swallowed by alien growth. Buildings covered in silver webbing. Streets filled with empty husks, eggs, shells, and the discarded skin of insectoid hatchlings that reeked of decay. The wilderness belonged to them now. The only living humans were here, behind glass. And we weren't alone. There were others, different rooms, other specimens. The same thought crossed all our minds at once. Mark lunged toward the transparent wall, pressing his hand against it. A sharp crackle filled the air. Electricity arced through his arm, and he screamed. "Mark!" Claire shouted, but before she could reach him, her body jolted too. One by one, we all tried to test the barrier, desperate to see beyond it. The insectoids reacted instantly. Mark was the first to be taken, then Jax, then Leo and Claire. As hands gripped me, lifting me away, I shouted the only plan I could think of. "Cry if you're alone,"
I yelled.
"Stop when you see someone. Keep doing it, they'll think it means something. It's the only way we can find each other." My idea worked. The insectoids didn't have faces like ours, but they had feelings. They were fascinated by humans who smiled, who cried, who behaved like pets. The same way we once adored small, soft animals that depended on us. After 3 days in isolation and 7 crying fits later, I was finally rewarded. They didn't bring me to the others, though. Instead, they filled my room with light. A holographic interface flickered to life around me, and I realized I could control what I saw. I hesitated, then selected the first feed. My stomach turned. 4 of my classmates were completely naked. Mark sat curled in a corner, eating. Simon slept. Leo drank juice straight from the container, belching without shame. The insectoids had adjusted the environment to a perfect, human temperature, one where clothing was unnecessary. They adored bare skin, softness, warmth. They had no sense of modesty, no understanding of violation. To them, this was beauty. Jax had it worse. His chest hair had been plucked clean, leaving his skin raw. According to insectoid health standards, it was an imperfection to be corrected. I watched helplessly as the footage looped for 2 days. Then suddenly one of the feeds went dark. Marks. Another 2 days later, Jax disappeared from the list. Only Simon and Leo remained. A creeping dread spread through me. What if this wasn't random? What if the insectoids thought our attention mattered? If they believed we were choosing our own mates based on which feed we watched longest? Was this their way of letting us select breeding partners? The thought made me sick. But the worst part was the irony. The ones I watched most weren't out of affection. It was because Simon and Leo were the only ones still trying to cover themselves. The thought festered until it became panic. That was when he entered, the same insectoid who had captured me. He was filling in for my caretaker, methodically sanitizing the room. I looked at him, wide-eyed, silently pleading. His compound eyes were still, but his antennae flicked, a subtle sign of awareness. He had always kept an eye on me, I realized, ever since that day in the forest. I turned toward the monitor, letting my expression crumble, as though I were on the verge of tears. He pretended not to notice, continuing to scrub the counters. Then, in a single deliberate gesture, one of his limbs brushed lightly against my ankle. The wound had closed, its edges raw, but no longer painful. In that instant, I understood. The reason I was isolated from the others wasn't special treatment, it was because I was injured. And an injured specimen wasn't suitable for breeding. That night, hidden under the thin paper sheets, I dug my fingernails into the wound and tore it open again. The pain was excruciating, but I bit down on the blanket to keep from screaming. Blood spattered the floor, dark and silent. When the doctor came in the next morning, it stared at my leg for a long time before reluctantly applying new bandages. An assistant entered and projected a holographic chart, its surface covered in wedge-like compatibility symbols. My gaze drifted to the top. Designation number 2, Ariana. Beneath her code glowed a list of golden symbols. Not one of them belonged to our classmates. The truth sank in slowly, sickeningly. A month later, I got my confirmation. Because of my recurring infection, I remained confined to the medical ward. Whenever they tried to raise the temperature or undress me for examination, I'd feign faintness, my body going limp. The constant bleeding, fever, and missed period made the act believable. Soon I was truly weak. The doctors seemed worried, exchanging anxious chirps. In an attempt to cheer me up, they changed the holographic display that day. That was when I saw her. Ariana, utterly transformed. The girl who had once been effortlessly radiant was now almost unrecognizable. Her beautiful curls were gone, chopped unevenly, and an angry red line marred her forehead, a mark left by a failed attempt to strangle herself with her own hair. She sat naked in a lavish, padded chamber that looked like a palace cell. Her skin was ghostly pale and swollen, her body round and soft, her belly stretched taut and enormous. She had gained so much weight that her stomach looked ready to burst. If she was pregnant, there had to be many. Nutrient liquids flowed endlessly around her, presented in elegant crystal vessels. Glittering toys decorated the room, more like offerings than possessions. If she so much as glanced at a tray, it was brought to her immediately. If she frowned, it was removed. It might have looked like luxury, until you saw the empty eyes behind her vacant smile. Each time a bell chimed, she would straighten up and grin toward the door, conditioned by repetition. She wasn't a queen. She was a prize animal. And her treatment was the purest example of what cherished meant to our new masters. My knees buckled as the screen flickered, and I saw the others, Claire and Jenna. Their enclosure was different. It resembled a garden exhibit, sunlight streaming through crystalline walls. A clamshell-shaped bath glimmered in the center of the room, turning their every movement into an art display. Claire sat inside, pale and silent, scribbling the same word over and over in spilled milk, escape. Jenna, more docile, was in the tub outside, bathing awkwardly under the gaze of dozens of spectators. Each splash of water drew a chorus of excited clicks. A young insectoid slapped the glass in joy, scolded by its parent for startling the rare human. Rows of alien faces watched, unblinking. They didn't see captives, they saw living treasures. Jenna, who had always been shy about her looks, was now their idol. 2 months. That was all it had taken for everything to collapse. I hadn't realized I was still standing until my leg stiffened and the dried blood cracked down my calf. When I looked up, the insectoid doctor was studying me again, seemingly pleased with what it saw, perhaps mistaking my horror for yearning. Later that night, I tried to reopen the wound again, but a mechanical limb caught my wrist mid-motion. My arms were bound to the bed, leaving me completely helpless. For 2 days, I was kept restrained until the wound healed entirely. Afterward, they fitted me with a cone-shaped collar that hung from my neck to my ankles, something between a restraint and a symbol of humiliation. A new note appeared on my profile, likely a warning about my deceptive tendencies. That was the last I saw of my classmates. Soon after, a delegation arrived to select a human specimen for transfer. I learned then that the insectoid civilization wasn't a single empire, but a union of regions, each competing in how they showcase their humans. These exchanges were considered prestigious cultural events. I was chosen for one such transfer, to a tropical district known for its research centers, their version of paradise. When I arrived, I was scanned, measured, recorded, and broadcast live. The media frenzy was unlike anything I'd seen. Thousands of insectoids swarmed to catch a glimpse, their clicks merging into a chorus that filled the air. Bobby-A, Bobby-A, Bobby-A. It was my name. They were chanting for me. Unlike the polite curiosity of my previous captors, this was raw obsession. As I was escorted into the Elysian Preserve, the grandest sanctuary of rare beings in the Insectoid Federation, I glanced back. Among the countless identical faces, one stood out in the crowd. The insectoid, who had first captured me. And then the doors closed. They placed me in the grandest enclosure, a perfect imitation of my old bedroom. Every detail matched, even the creased pillowcase I used to sleep on. 4 attendants were assigned solely to my nutrition, monitoring every bite. My meals were imported from the previous facility to ensure dietary continuity. And unlike Ariana or Claire, I had something unique, a shallow saltwater pool where fish darted under rippling light. Crowds came daily to see me. They lined up outside the glass, rows of faceted eyes gleaming with fascination. Overhead galleries filled with clicking spectators, and the preserve's profits tripled in a month. They even engraved my name on a silver plaque, praising me as their most celebrated acquisition. But novelty fades fast. Before long, their obsession shifted to the newborns, chubby, rosy creatures with soft limbs and round faces. The aliens adored how the babies squirmed and giggled, how a single breath made them coo. Soon, the staff's glances toward me changed. They examined my teeth, drew my blood, took endless measurements. Something was being debated behind their unreadable eyes. Then that night, my period came. The preserve erupted in excitement. They might not have known my exact age, but menstruation was universal. It meant I was fertile. Fertile meant profitable. And just like that, I understood. Whether trampled or pampered, it was the same. Power always belonged to the hand holding the leash. When I was younger, I believed in stories of meeting someone extraordinary, kind and brilliant, who would see my soul as clearly as I saw his. That dream had kept me untouched and idealistic, even through college. But 2 days after my period ended, in this pristine glass prison, that dream shattered. My mate was brought in. He was a blond man with dull eyes and an empty smile. When he spoke, his words were nonsense, distant echoes of a language I barely recognized. English, perhaps, but twisted by centuries. When I refused, they brought another, a dark-skinned man with massive shoulders and broken teeth. He chewed his fingers bloody, lost in some silent madness. Then came more, dragged from far-off districts, each one bearing the deformities of long-isolated bloodlines. The preserve's goal was clear. They wanted a native-born human of their region. Any offspring sired by an outsider would be shipped elsewhere, and that would hurt their prestige. My continued defiance exhausted them. The director finally ordered Phase 2. They injected me with something burning hot, a stimulant, an aphrodisiac, the kind used on livestock to guarantee compliance. The last man approached, breath foul, movements clumsy. I bit down on my wrist until I tasted metal. Blood splattered across the white floor, the sting snapping me back to myself. Outside, the audience watched eagerly, their eyes alight with curiosity. Each gasp, each click, each murmur, it was all entertainment to them. I wasn't their equal, or even a pet. I was an experiment with a pulse. When the man lunged again, I tore my wrist wider, forcing my trembling body backward until I fell into the saltwater pool. The water burned against the wound. My blood spread in crimson clouds, fish darting toward it. For a moment, the entire hall froze. 1,000 years of conditioning had erased aggression from the human species, leaving behind docile, compliant shells. And now, before them, one of their prized exhibits had turned feral. They didn't move. They just stared. And I, trembling in the red-tinted water, began to cry. After that incident, the man was escorted away, and I was labeled unstable. They placed me in behavioral isolation for observation. The caretakers whispered that humans long ago had once been food. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. My exhibition privileges were revoked. Young insectoid children had been traumatized by my outburst, and complaints flooded in. I was no longer an attraction. I was a liability. They transferred me again. My new room was bare, smaller than a storage unit. My diet consisted of one thing: sweet potatoes. Sometimes baked, sometimes raw. Once in a while, I was granted a shriveled fruit as a reward. My 4 attendants were replaced by one, a surly male who threw my food on the floor. If I didn't eat it, I went hungry. And when I starved, he got reprimanded. My worth dictated his pay, and my failure made him cruel. After 2 months, my body was little more than bone and shadow. My thinness disgusted him. The insectoids preferred plumpness, believing fat symbolized health and fertility. He began to shriek whenever he entered, a sharp, metallic screech that sliced through the air like broken glass. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the contempt. The scar on my wrist thickened, twisting ugly under my skin. I had stopped counting days. Then, one afternoon, a roar echoed through the corridor, the rhythmic chorus of clicking applause. I crept to the edge of my enclosure and pressed my face against a narrow crack in the wall. There, in the saltwater pool that had once been mine, stood Jenna. She was radiant. Her body glowed under the artificial light as she splashed playfully, her every motion met with thunderous joy from the crowd. The same crowd that had once worshipped me. Jenna had taken my place. Behind me, my keeper tapped the glass, sending ripples through the wall. A reminder. A warning.
Move. Perform.
Be useful. The next day, when my keeper brought food, I didn't just sit there. I picked it up, sat cross-legged the way they liked, tilted my head toward it, and took small, deliberate bites. Its antennae twitched. I kept this up for 3 days. When it tried to touch my head again, I fought down the revulsion and stayed still, continuing to eat. A week later, my keeper brought another insectoid. After a round of tests, they decided I was no longer a danger to myself or others. I could be cautiously reintroduced to the public. The risks were obvious, but money always won. To be safe, they starved me for 2 days before the event. By the time they brought me out, I was weak and dizzy. They placed me inside a giant crystal seashell. For 10 gold coins, an insectoid could take a picture with me. With each photo, I was rewarded with a thin slice of sour green apple, a luxury I hadn't tasted in months. That day, I ate more than I could remember. My mouth filled with saliva, but I couldn't stop. Hunger stripped away dignity. The insectoids grabbed my hands, pressed their faces against mine. Some secretly plucked a strand or 2 of hair as souvenirs. I couldn't resist. If I harmed a tourist, the punishment would be worse than death. I'd seen what they did to an old man in the opposite enclosure once he was no longer profitable. They'd pulled out all his teeth. My compliance paid off. My reputation began to recover, and more visitors came for photos. But it still wasn't enough. I needed to be noticed again, to reach Jenna and the others. My meals depended on these performances, yet the constant diet of sweet potatoes and apples was slowly destroying me. Then one afternoon, he appeared again, the insectoid who had first brought me here. He clearly wasn't rich. He waited patiently in line, and when it was his turn, he could afford only a single slice of apple. As I took it, I felt something else pressed into my palm, a small piece of cooked meat. My head snapped up. He let out a soft gritch sound, the same one he used back in the first facility.
It was his nickname for me.
I decided to call him Gritch. I grabbed his hand. The other insectoids gasped, but when they saw I was just nuzzling against him, their clicks turned to excitement. That single, intimate act made me a star again. And it finally earned me a joint appearance with Jenna. If she was as famous as she seemed, maybe she knew more about the crash. Maybe she had a plan. The preserve was ecstatic about our reunion. The insectoids believed humans had some intelligence left, but centuries of inbreeding had stripped it away. Most of the surviving humans were frail, simple-minded, unable to recognize one another. But we were different. From the moment of capture, we'd shown signs of higher thought. We were the new luxury species. Facilities paid fortunes just to lease one of us, hoping to breed smarter offspring. When I saw Jenna again, her belly was slightly rounded. I couldn't tell if she was pregnant or simply gaining weight. She moved closer, whispering, "We're never getting out of here, Barb. We might as well adapt." "You call this living well?" I asked. A faint, bitter smile crossed her face. "At least we don't have to worry about surviving. Food, shelter, comfort, they're all provided. And they love me here more than anyone ever did back home. An animal is never a slave, unless you offer it comfort." I stared at her belly. She laughed softly. "Being adored always has a price."
Whose is it?
She shrugged. "I don't know. It doesn't matter." "Do you really want a child to live like this?" She met my gaze calmly, armed with a logic she'd built to survive. "What's so bad about this life? At least I don't have to fight for scraps. Back home, I'd be working myself to death just to pay rent. You, Ariana, Claire, you all had options. I didn't. Here, at least, we're all equal." I was stunned. I had never realized Jenna felt this way. But what about freedom?
Dignity.
She scoffed. "Dignity doesn't feed you. Here, it can at least be traded for something real. Can you say the same for the old world?" She turned, walked away, then looked back. "You used to rant about wild animals, how they shouldn't be caged. You thought freedom was sacred. But take it from me, being kept is easier. Being controlled is peaceful." "Do the others feel the same?" I asked. Jenna shrugged. "Most of them weren't as cooperative. They got sent away. But I heard someone else is coming with the next transport." She gave a thin smile. "They're bringing more breeding stock. You'd better hope it's Jax or Mark. At least they're not ugly." Her words chilled me. The new transport wasn't just for relocation, it was for insemination. To sustain a human population, they needed at least 98 individuals, 40 of them male. The current number barely reached 70, and most were related. Centuries of inbreeding had left our kind on the edge of collapse. The insectoids were now using the same methods humans had once used to save endangered species. Some were re-wilded, released into forests in hopes of finding other survivors. Others, like us, were part of controlled breeding programs. There was nothing new under the sun, and the pairing that had been delayed for 6 months was now back on the table. After being weighed, I was taken to a special room filled with fresh flowers. The floor was carpeted in petals, soft and fragrant. When they set me down, I saw a man standing there. I never expected it to be Simon. "Where are Mark and the others?" I asked. Simon looked awkward. He had wrapped his waist in vines and flowers for modesty. "Mark is very busy right now," he said after a pause. "Because he's considered aesthetically superior, he's in high demand for work in different facilities." He used the word work, but we both knew what he meant. "And Jax?" I asked. Jax was stronger, more solidly built than Mark. Jax has chest hair, and his skin isn't pale enough. They're modifying him. Last time I saw a feed, he was in a sterile lab up north, near the glaciers. They used chemicals. His body hair is gone, so are his eyebrows. A pet's beauty depended entirely on the whims of its master. "Ariana is in solitary breeding," he added. "No one's seen her. She's probably about to give birth. Leo is very popular. He's on tour, like Jenna. Claire's still at the home facility. She's due soon, too." He looked at me then, eyes filled with quiet pity. "Barb, how have you been? You still seem the most human of us." 2 insectoids stood outside, watching us through the glass, their antennae twitching. "They're monitoring our compatibility and condition," Simon said softly. "What if we're not compatible?" "They can't force that," I said. He gave a faint, bitter smile. "They won't give up. This preserve paid a fortune for me. They'll make sure they get their return." He hesitated, his face tight with shame. "We're classmates. We're from the same place. If you don't want to, I won't force you." I lifted my arm and showed him the scar, told him what I'd done the last time they tried. His expression flickered. After a moment, he shook his head slowly. "That won't work again." "You think so? They haven't drugged us this time." He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it. Silence stretched between us. The next day, I found out what he'd meant. I woke to a searing pain between my hips. The air was cold, sharp with disinfectant. I was lying on a metal table. My legs were numb. An insectoid in a crystal necklace was cleaning its instruments. I had been artificially inseminated. The sample came from Simon, extracted through electrostimulation. It was a procedure they had perfected. Quick, clinical, merciless. To ensure success, they repeated it twice more. This time, I conceived. I didn't know how many embryos or their sex. But I was pregnant. Learning from Ariana's near-fatal case, 8 fetuses at once, they performed a fetal reduction on me, leaving 4. Even so, by 2 months my belly was already swollen. The director of the preserve was thrilled. There were celebrations for days. According to their regulations, if both parents came from the same facility and only one baby survived, the infant had to be sent back. But with multiple births, the host facility could keep one. After negotiations, the director secured rights to 2 of mine. In the end, only one child survived, a frail, tiny boy. He died that same month. I stared at his still body, a storm of grief and strange relief swirling inside me. A month later, I saw Simon again. He looked thinner, paler, the light in his eyes dimmed. He'd been brought here again, the only male to have successfully fathered a child with me. The same flower petal room awaited us, unchanged, as if mocking us. Simon told me Jax was alive, that his condition had improved. Though his body had been altered and he was no longer popular, he'd been moved to a southern facility with better living conditions. I heard the average lifespan for humans here is under 40, Simon said. But at this new place, the Argonne Preserve, they have a man who's almost 50. The insectoids are obsessed with him. They want him to break the record. He smiled faintly. It's something, right? At least Jax is alive. And if we were sent here by accident, maybe we can go back. Don't give up, Barb. He reached out and took my hand. As long as we're alive, there's hope. He let go. The electrostimulation procedure had become routine for him. It was excruciating, but he endured it. I won't force you, he whispered, face drawn with shame. It's the only thing I can do for you. This time, I reached for his hand first. We were human. That was all we had left. I buried my face against his chest. He went rigid, then shifted slightly to block the insectoid's view. I'm sorry, he murmured. A year later, I was pregnant again. Twins this time. The weaker one died at birth. The survivor was a beautiful, healthy daughter. The insectoids, satisfied with my behavior, allowed me to raise her. I didn't know for how long, but she was mine. A piece of my soul. I loved her desperately. She was soft and gentle, with wide, curious eyes. When she turned 1, she looked at me and said her first word. Mama. Tears streamed down my face. I loved that she existed. I hated myself for bringing her into this world. Not long after, I woke from an unusually deep sleep. My arms were empty. My daughter was gone. I never even got to name her. She had been sent back to the home facility, just as the agreement required. A month later, Simon returned. He was skeletal, his face ashen. He was only 25, but he looked close to 40. His body was breaking down from constant insemination procedures and travel. He had undergone emergency surgery on his way here, yet he still tried to smile when he saw me. But he brought terrible news. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping. Barb, Jax is dead. I froze. Then he broke down, shaking. It wasn't simple. Jax hadn't just died, he'd been used. He had been sent to the Argonne Preserve, where the 50-year-old record holder was kept. To keep that prized human alive, they had turned Jax into a living blood bank. His blood was drained again, and again to sustain the other man. When the transport came to pick up Simon, whose body was failing, they took Jax too, as a backup. Simon collapsed upon arrival, and Jax was forced to give his last pint. Simon buried his face in my hands, his tears hot against my skin. They called us treasures, didn't they?
Why?
Why did this happen? Wasn't Jax a treasure too?
He sobbed.
We were supposed to go back together. Together. I shook my head, my voice empty. Treasure? A preciousness that comes without choice, without respect. What kind of treasure is that? When they love you, you're adored. When they're done with you, you're just an animal. Simon looked up, eyes swollen, his face wet with grief. Barb, was I wrong? I shouldn't have. A series of low, rhythmic sounds broke the silence. The insectoids had turned on their motivation system, a grotesque display meant to make us cooperate. They were projecting videos of other humans, forced together under the same cruel pretense of reproduction. As the footage rolled, my breath caught in my throat. I saw Leo, trembling and tear-streaked, Claire, ghostly pale and hollow-eyed. Jenna, rigid with shame, her face turned away. And then, horrifyingly, I saw myself. Simon reached out and covered my eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "We were born into servitude, stripped of all dignity. What once sounded like hope, we still have time, had turned into a curse. Time only meant more pain, more despair stretched into infinity. My contract here had 1 year left. The preserve intended to secure their prize before it expired. They inseminated me again. This time, I carried quadruplets. 2 were stillborn, though the facility falsely reported 4 healthy births. By agreement, 2 would remain at this preserve, while the other 2 would eventually be shipped back to the main facility. During my pregnancy, to draw public attention, they brought in another celebrity, Jenna. She was still pale, still round, but the light that once danced to her eyes was gone. Too many pregnancies had destroyed her body. Her figure was so distorted that her handlers allowed her to wear clothes for modesty. Scarring had blocked her fallopian tubes, making her infertile. Once the pride of the preserve, Jenna was now an exhibit. Her value drained, she spent her days posing for photos beside tourists, rewarded with tiny bits of apple or sweet potato. The sweet potatoes made her ill, which earned her the constant scorn of her keeper. Her private pool was gone. Her luxurious quarters replaced with a single, windowless cage beside the visitor path. She was expected to perform without rest, adjusting to every species schedule. After giving birth to 5 litters, her usefulness had ended. She was no longer a star, just another piece of entertainment. The next time I saw her, I was walking outside with my infants. Despite my exhaustion, I forced myself to attend public events. Popularity was survival. I learned to read the subtle tones of insectoid speech, the rhythm of their clicks, the pitch of their chirps. Gradually, I began to understand their language, at least a little. That day, a cheer rose from the crowd. Among the sea of chittering onlookers, I spotted a familiar face, Gritch. He was still here, still following me. I shaped my lips silently, forming one insectoid word I had learned. Home. As the mob surged around us, Jenna's eyes met mine. She bit her lip, trembling. None of her children had survived. Tears filled her eyes, but no sound left her mouth. Freedom and comfort could be traded here, but never on human terms. They gave and they took away. She was a broken toy now, and she finally knew it. But she had realized it too late. It didn't take long. Jenna was dead. She had struck a young insectoid that pulled her hair and bitten off part of its arm. For that, she was sent to desensitization training. They locked her inside a small, dark pen without food. Desperate, she dug into the dirt floor and broke through to a shallow underground stream. She slipped inside. When they found her, she wasn't breathing. The water was barely knee-deep. She could have stood. Maybe she didn't want to. Maybe she no longer had the strength. Her body was later preserved, stuffed, and sold at auction to a wealthy insectoid leader who wore a chain of golden beads the size of fists. For a brief moment, the public debated her death. In theory, humans were still national treasures. But the outrage faded quickly, drowned by a much larger scandal. The rewilding experiment had failed. The facility had released Claire, chosen for her gentleness and prior outdoor training, back into the forest where we were first captured. A team monitored her from a distance, ready to recapture her if needed. She was sent out holding her small daughter's hand. 1 day later, they found her dead beneath a large tree, half-eaten. Her daughter's body lay beside her. The home facility was thrown into chaos. Protests spread among the insectoids. The director publicly claimed that a tracking device had malfunctioned and that wolves were to blame. The experiment, he insisted, was sound, only its execution flawed. Then an investigative report revealed another secret: the death of the most beautiful human, Ariana. She had died years ago during her first pregnancy. The insectoids had forced her to carry 10 fetuses, all for research. None survived. This revelation ignited fury. It questioned the very logic of their breeding program. If humans survived on their own for millions of years, they asked, why would they suddenly struggle to reproduce? Why rely on artificial insemination and electrical methods? If you hadn't destroyed their habitat, they would have survived naturally. You said they'd starve in winter, but they stored food, didn't they? That was proven. And if the land hadn't been turned into a chemical wash zone for your egg batches, maybe they would have still been alive. Those wild humans were intelligent. They wore clothing, they built tools, and you still captured them. Every specimen you take reduces their genetic diversity. The best preservation is leaving them free. Under this mounting outrage, the director made a public vow to prove their research was valid. And there was only one remaining subject who could do that.
Me.
The last fertile human. After all these years, I was being sent back to where it had all begun. The home facility looked just as polished and sterile as I remembered, but the people inside were no longer truly alive. They had been returned to their pods, silent remnants of what they once were. Mark, who had been employed without rest, was a husk of himself. His legs trembled beneath him, and he spent most of his time submerged in a nutrient tank to stay alive. Leo, once the shining favorite, had lost nearly all his hair. Without its protection, he too would soon fade, like Jax before him. But Simon was not among them. He had been placed elsewhere, raising his child, our child. She was old enough to run now, her laughter soft but real, and she had become his entire world. Sometimes, he would crouch beside her, whispering softly, "Sweetheart, of all of us, you're the most human." He saw me watching from the corridor. Our eyes met, but I said nothing. The infants here rarely survived. My twin boys had died shortly after I was transferred out. That little girl was the only one of our children who had lived past infancy. She had become the preserve's pride and proof of success. Every camera, every insectoid observer, followed her every move. It had taken Simon months of obedience and gentleness to earn their trust. He was quiet, compliant, almost painfully kind, the perfect example of what they considered a docile human. His tenderness as a father pleased them, and because of that, the child was allowed to see him daily. There had never been a single incident. When I returned, they scheduled a family reunion as part of their publicity campaign. I walked toward them slowly, careful not to trigger the sensors hidden in the walls. Simon looked up at me and asked softly, "Would you like to give her a name?" I hesitated, then shook my head.
No.
Names create attachment. Attachment gives birth to love. And love only makes loss unbearable. Moments later, as I entered the rest area, the silence shattered. There was a shriek from outside, followed by the sharp hum of insectoid wings and a piercing hiss of alarm. Then came a whistling sound, sharp and final. I didn't turn around. In the mirrored wall ahead of me, I saw Simon. His hands were around our daughter's small neck. Blood sprayed from a clean wound across her throat. A blast tore through the air, taking half of Simon's shoulder and chest. He fell, crimson spilling from his lips, and looked toward me one last time, his mouth shaping a word I couldn't hear. Then he was still. The incident sent the facility's director into a frenzy. He executed 2 keepers on the spot as punishment for their failure. I didn't cry. I sat in the glass-walled rest area, head buried in my knees, numb. I knew I should have wept. But when I lifted my gaze and saw the distorted faces of the remaining humans in their pens, the tears refused to come. Was I sad? I couldn't tell anymore. Among captives, selective breeding was standard practice. For better genes, prettier offspring, stronger babies, culling was inevitable. Inbreeding was tolerated, even encouraged. If I had died during the rewilding experiment, my daughter would have become the last fertile female in the facility. I didn't want to imagine what future awaited her. A dog cannot refuse. A cat cannot resist. But a human can choose. And some futures are not meant to be endured. Under the vigilant gaze of every insectoid in the preserve, they strapped a costly, nearly indestructible tracking device to me and released me into the wild. The world had changed dramatically over 1,000 years. Rainfall had increased so drastically that deserts became meadows, meadows became dense forests. But no matter where I went, remnants of the insectoids were everywhere. Their marks scarred the land, pollution, ruined soils, and fragmented ecosystems. I didn't glance back. I just stepped forward, toward mountains, forests, wild berries, and drifting white clouds. One step at a time, I moved. A jagged stone sliced my foot, leaving a thin line of blood on the grass. The insectoids had left a supply crate on a gentle slope to capture my progress on camera. I retrieved it, climbed higher, and kept ascending. From behind, I heard the familiar chittering. One voice crackled through the static. "She's climbing too high. Could be dangerous." Another replied, "It's fine. Female humans are naturally timid." I walked for a while longer, then rested. The sun scorched my skin. At last, I reached the summit and surveyed the land. The insectoids thought I was scouting for a mate. They were wrong. I was mapping. Thick branches, boulder clusters, possible shelter. I selected my spot and ate the dried meat I carried. 2 nights later, I shattered the tracker with a piece of flint, tossing the mangled remains over the cliff. The monitoring station lit up immediately, but a rare solar storm disrupted their systems long enough for me to vanish. Then I saw him.
Gritch.
He stood there, watching me, just as he had during my heartbreak. The day I laid my son to rest, the day my daughter was taken, the day I endured the pain of birth and despair. Other insectoids had called me a precious mother, but he had never said a word. I smiled. Gritch, I whispered. In his language, it didn't mean a name. It meant, I'm sorry. Then I stepped off the cliff. A hovering drone shot toward me. A bullet pierced my temple just before it could intervene. The sun erupted in a final, dazzling flare. Gritch was restrained by dozens of others, silent in his anguish. Run forward, Barb. Never look back. And for the first time, the world was truly free. Epilogue 1. When we awoke, no one spoke. The transport had toppled on its side. We crawled out to chaos, panicked shouts, staff rushing to help. Only the driver was hurt. A sharp ache lingered in my temple. Mark rubbed his nose. Ariana trembled. Leo held his head in his hands. Claire looked haunted. Jax's lips were white from biting so hard. Simon sat perfectly still beside me. The instructor, oblivious to our trauma, chirped, "We're here to rescue a wild female panda cub. Follow protocol, stay calm. We'll observe her back at the base." No one moved.
He laughed.
Of course, you're animal science majors. Used to this." The vehicle rattled along until we reached the cub. Her fur was thick and wild, her cry like a tiny yelp. She hesitated, torn between flight and trust. I bent down, picked up a rock, and threw it near her. Startled, she bolted into the mountains. One by one, we joined her chase, our voices hoarse, but full of hope.
Run.
Don't look back. Epilogue 2. 40 years later, I discovered a wounded wild female in the R-1030 range. She was unlike the captive-bred humans, strong, vibrant, with straight black hair. I called to her softly. She paused, dragging her injured leg, then reached out. I carried her to the preserve and was paid 30 gold coins. They named her Baba. She believed she was being rescued. She didn't know she was stepping into another form of captivity, a hell gilded with applause and false praise. As long as profit existed, preciousness could be exploited endlessly. I could never forget her gaze, her tears. I had seen humans bred, sold, used for sport and survival. I thought I understood it. But it wasn't until Baba spoke my name that I truly did. I watched her grieve, watched her endure pain and loss, watched her used again and again.
No.
That was never what a treasure should be. A true treasure is respected, cherished, nurtured. A bond of mutual care. So when she looked at me one last time, I helped her. I may face execution for it now, but a peace I've never known fills me. If only I could return to the moment I first saw her, I would whisper, "Run forward, Baba. Don't ever look back."